Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jason Bain. I'm Industry Manager for Hospitality and Catering here at City and Guilds. I'm also with my colleague Amelia, Technical Advisor. And we're just going to go over today with the Team Member Hospitality Supervisor Endpoint Assessment. Should take approximately 45 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end just for some questions. Today we are going to leave the questions until the end. And we'll make a start.
Good afternoon, everybody.
So the agenda today, keeping you up to date, just a little bit of information on how you can keep up to date, 10 steps to EPA, gateway requirements, the business project and the proposal, business operations brief, a little bit on the initial meeting. We're just going to go over the multiple choice test, the business project, practical observation, the professional discussion, some feedback and general points for consideration at this stage. So the key documents, you can find this on our website, the links are there. We will be sending these out later for you to access, and the links will provide you an opportunity to see the latest newsletters. For the last year or so, we've been doing monthly newsletters. We are going to a bi-monthly because we are now getting more and more information out to you. And we're finding less and less to go out on a monthly basis. So we're going to start bi-monthly as of now. So the next one should be due out around the middle of March. But on there, you also get access to latest webinars and any other material that we feel necessary to pass out to you, such as support material for your departmental preparation for next year, for example, so you can get on there and access our latest certification dates and end dates, for example. So use this key document area to find out information as and when we update it. Sorry, gone the wrong way. So endpoint assessment support documents, these are available upon registration, and to really start the EPA process with the apprentices you need to download the endpoint assessment pack, and this can be found within the documents for each apprenticeship standard. It is password protected. This can be gained from the War Garden once you've registered the apprentices here at City and Guilds. There is a separate endpoint assessment pack for each of the specific routes for both team member and hospitality supervisor.
Okay, so just going to talk you through now the EPA service. This is our 10 steps to endpoint assessment guide. So we do advise that you register your apprentices as early with us as you possibly can, so that you can get access to all of our exemplar materials and the assessment packs that Jason's just discussed. You'll also get access, if you register with us, to the EPA preparation tool, and that's actually where the exemplar materials are also stored. So once you've met the gateway requirements, then you can obviously make your booking for endpoint assessment. There is a section here that sort of talks about it sort of taking at least booking EPA at least 3 months before endpoint assessment, but actually you don't need to do that. We are in the process of updating this 10 steps guide, so there will be something new coming out soon. Essentially, you need to make your reservation once the apprentices have been on programme for at least 366 days. And in a moment, I'll go through that in a bit more detail with exactly what you need to do. Essentially, once you've made your booking for endpoint assessment and you use the War Garden to do this, which is exactly the same place as you would have registered your learners, then we'll start the communication with you about exactly when you want endpoint assessment. We'll ask you to complete a data capture form, and this data capture form will we'll be asking for details of the apprentice, the employer. So once you've completed that and sent that back to us, then we give you access to the EPA portal. And the EPA portal is where you will upload your Gateway declaration, your Maths and English certificates, and then in a moment I'll give you the requirements for team member and hospitality supervisor. Once we've got those and accepted all that, then we switch off your access to the EPA portal, and the portal then is where we actually carry out endpoint assessment between our endpoint assessors and our lead endpoint assessors. At the moment, endpoint assessment, it can take up to 90 days, but in lots of cases it's taking less than that. And should you need any specific requirements or something happening quite quickly, then by all means do have a conversation with our EPA team, and they will do their best to fit you in as quickly as possible. But obviously that needs to bear in mind our endpoint assessor availability. So it is obviously clearly based on that. We do have numerous endpoint assessors for team member and hospitality supervisor working throughout the country now, and we have had endpoint assessments through on both of those standards now, and people sort of fully completed. So there are people working throughout the country that will be able to sort of carry out the endpoint assessments for you. So in terms of then what happens at the end, throughout the process, should your apprentice fail any of the component parts of endpoint assessment, then you will be notified. It takes a couple of weeks for us to get the results back from the endpoint assessor and then the lead endpoint assessor to quality assure. So just over the sort of 1 to 2 week period, then you will get notification if the apprentice has failed, and then obviously we would need you to rebook the apprentice for whichever part it was. If the apprentice has passed that component part, then you won't actually sort of get any feedback, and we'll move on to the next part of the process. The end of the process, results can take up to 20 days for you to actually get the final results of pass or indeed distinction, and a breakdown then of exactly all the different parts. Right at the end of the process, you will receive from us, as the provider, you'll receive the Statement of Achievement, which will show you later, which lists the different parts of endpoint assessment and the grades. And then via the Institute for Apprenticeships, or the ESFA, are basically on behalf of the Institute of Apprenticeships, they are producing the IFA certificate, and that will be sent directly to the employer. Okay, so the gateway process. So it's important that the gateway meeting takes place prior to booking any endpoint assessment, so that all parties are comfortable that the apprentice is ready and willing to undertake the endpoint assessment. And we need you to complete a declaration of this meeting. So the endpoint assessment starting point. So it's really important that you and the employer and the apprentice are ready and aware of the next steps. So before the gateway evidence is required, the position you need to be in is that the gateway meeting has taken place and that the declaration has been signed by the provider, yourselves, the employer and the apprentice. Maths and English evidence at the level that the apprentice needs it to be at must be also available. And then the apprentice needs to have been on the standard for at least 366 days. Longer is absolutely fine, but that's the minimum amount that needs to be met. So once you've met these requirements, then you can make your EPA booking and essentially go through the gateway. Within a couple of weeks of making the booking, after you've filled out the data capture form, etc., and you're given access to the EPA portal, that's then where you're going to start to need to upload that gateway evidence. And this, at this point, will also include, for team member and hospitality supervisor, a business project proposal, a business operations brief, and a 2-week work schedule. So let's sort of look at each of the different aspects. So the business project proposal recording form can be found within the recording forms document under each of the apprenticeship standard documents tab. And there we've shown you the food and beverage supervisor, so you can see that you get that from the food and beverage supervisor EPA recording forms, and then that's the business project proposal recording form and you can also see there the declaration of authenticity for the business project. So we advise that you use these recording forms rather than creating any of your own, because these are the ones that the endpoint assessment teams will want to see. The Gateway Declaration, it's found again in the recording forms packs and looks exactly like this. So let's talk about each of those other bits and pieces that need to be uploaded. So the business project proposal will be reviewed by the endpoint assessor, and a decision is given to the apprentice during the initial meeting as to whether it's fit for purpose. So meaning that at this point the apprentice can then go away and produce their business project. I need to stipulate here that the business project should not be started until after the agreement during the initial meeting that the business project proposal has been accepted. If this does take place, then you are jeopardising the apprentice's business project. So you do need to be mindful that the business project is part of the endpoint assessment process, so shouldn't be started. So for both team member and hospitality supervisor, the proposal only needs to be 200 to 300 words. It needs to be completed on this document that we're showing you now, which, as we've already said, is found in the recording forms. The proposal for the business project must be the apprentice's own work, and it must have been discussed with the employer. It also needs to be relevant to the employer's business and focus on making some form of an improvement. The other document that needs to then be uploaded to the EPA portal at the same time as the business project proposal is the business operations brief. Now, there's more information that's come out about this recently, and it's found in the link here that we're showing you, which was in an EPA update in February, which was also emailed around to everybody. So the EPA recording form has now been updated. So you can see here it says business project proposal and brief recording form. So you can add the business operations brief onto this recording form as well. So it can be both your business project proposal and the business operations brief. The brief needs to be an overview of the relationship between the apprentice's job role, the organisation and the industry, including the business culture and how the business operates to their brand standards. It doesn't need to be any more than one A4 page. And it's required for both team member and hospitality supervisor. And this again is discussed at the initial meeting so that the endpoint assessor has an understanding of the business the apprentice works in and their role within it. So just to reiterate, again, it needs to be the apprentice's own work. Clearly, they will have discussed this with the employer because I'm sure they'll support in the organisation and the industry and the business culture and the brand standards. But there, as you can see sort of in italics on the left-hand side, those are the key component parts that the business operations brief needs to contain.
Okay, so I'll give Amelia a little break now. Moving on to the initial meeting, very similar to the other occupational standards that we currently run with related to common chef and chef de partie, etc. But just going over it as a bit of a recap. The initial meeting, it is a remote meeting. It will involve a conference call. And with the IEPA, there needs to be the apprentice in attendance and a representative of the employer. This needs to be somebody who works closely with the apprentice and somebody who can make decisions and talk to them about things like availability, etc., and confirm aspects during this initial meeting. This, for all parties, they will receive a conference call number, which they need to dial into. The IEPA is then responsible for informing the EPA team of the dates that have been agreed, and the EPA team will then provide the provider with a booking confirmation. So moving on, the multiple choice test. The EPA materials for the for the multiple choice test. You must ensure that this is downloaded. You must ensure that you download the Endpoint Assessment Handbook, as this is essentially the test specification. So it's really important that you follow the test specification, as this adds the meat to the bone, or meat to the bones of the criteria that's in the People First assessment plan. So don't just follow the assessment plan, you need to follow the test specifications. And this gives you all the topics that you need to have been teaching, as the questions are designed to only cover the content within this handbook. I apologise. So for Hospitality Supervisor, there's a separate knowledge questions, which are samples. These sample tests you can use to support developing your apprentice in readiness for the online test. And for team member, these questions are within the Endpoint Assessment Pack, but these will soon be removed, like the Hospitality Supervisor ones that you see here. So we currently have updated the Endpoint Assessment Packs to add in further information in supporting you with knowing what you exactly need to, or what is exactly required for the online tests. And here this just gives some clarity on the usage of calculators, as well as the pass marks, the duration, and the exact numbers of questions, and the breakdown of number of questions which are covered within the criteria area. This should support you in developing your scheme of work, better to know where to plan your best use of teaching. So this just gives you all the information of what to be covering, to what degree. So the multiple choice test, you're responsible for booking the online test, and this should be undertaken as soon as your booking the EPA is confirmed. And when you book this, you need 5 days leading time, so you cannot book one day and expect to take the test the following day. This is for the first sitting as well as resits. And there on the screen, just information surrounding the multiple choice test. So preparing the apprentice. It's important that the apprentice is given all the support to help them pass. They must revise, and they must use the Endpoint Assessment Handbook. And all the lessons that you provided to support with this, they must be reviewing and revising through. Please also ensure that you verse them in the answering questions, which starts with main, best, or first, and just getting them into good practice of how to deal with these multiple choice questions. They need to read the questions fully and answer correctly. There is also some statement questions in which within the test, which we have added more support on in the Endpoint Assessment Pack. So it is really important that they start to get familiar with these type of questions.
Okay, so on to the actual business project. So here is the business project recording form. So please do use the City & Guilds recording forms. They are Word documents, so they can be directly typed into. And the reason that we ask that is because they have a content within them and a layout, which means that the apprentice will more easily cover the actual requirements of the business project. Please don't allow them to do PowerPoint presentations, as the few that we have had through that have been in this format, it appears to be limiting the apprentice's ability to actually add full content to the business project, because really all they're doing is bullet pointing. So the apprentice needs to be given the pass and the distinction criteria, so they know exactly what they are trying to hit. So it's absolutely fine that you give those details to them. It doesn't have to be kept in the dark. They do need to know exactly what they need to do to meet pass and indeed to meet distinction. The business project must relate to the business the apprentice works in. And it doesn't have to be carried out. So it can be theoretical, or indeed it can apply to general practice. So for team member, it's not necessary to carry out the actual business idea. so long as the team members, the apprentices in question, consider the impact and how success will be measured and what period it would likely to be trialled for. For hospitality supervisor, we are finding that apprentices are actually wanting to carry out the business projects, but they do need to bear in mind that timescales are quite restrictive. Within the business project, it's important that for both team member and hospitality supervisor that the apprentice includes an introduction to the business, their role and how this fits into the wider hospitality business. The inclusion of references is also required. So there on the right hand side you can see that for team member the content of the business project needs to cover a summary, an introduction, the actual content, conclusions and recommendations along with references. As you can imagine, for hospitality supervisor there's an extension to really what needs to cover. So with hospitality supervisor it's expected that there will be an introduction and background, a focus, an aims and objectives, the research, findings, conclusions and recommendations. Now, as I've said, the actual recording forms do lead you to actually do these sections, so they are labelled in that way, and there on the left you can see the hospitality supervisor, so the start of it being sort of introduction and background. Now, feedback will only be provided, as I said before, if the apprentice fails this part, and then the areas that the apprentice fails on will be notified to you so that you can do some work with them to then sort of improve their business project to then represent. The business project, again, as I've already said, cannot be completed until the business project proposal has been accepted by the endpoint assessor during the initial meeting. It must be the apprentice's own work, and we will require the declaration of authenticity to be completed so that we can clearly see that that's the case. It has to be uploaded to the EPA portal around 2 weeks before the practical observation, but it must be uploaded before the practical observation actually takes place. So for team member, it can be between 800 and 1,200 words, and then for hospitality supervisor, 2,000 to 5,000 words. So some ideas then of business projects. This information is found in our endpoint assessment packs. So it can be a wide range of projects, but it does need to focus on the actual business and be improving something. So there's some suggestions there: customer feedback, waste management, hygiene issues, service efficiency, etc. Some of the current live examples of business projects have been on controlling waste, promoting new items, adding further items to menus, and improving till systems. All of these were based on the actual apprentices' businesses and were all accepted by the endpoint assessors. So some hints and tips. Make sure that you do issue the pass and distinction criteria to the apprentice so they're aware of what they need to do. Include an introduction to the business and the apprentice's role and how the business fits in the wider hospitality industry. Use the City and Guilds recording forms, not PowerPoint presentations. Don't start the business project until it's been accepted by the endpoint assessor at the initial meeting. It can be theoretical or it can apply to general practice. And it must be submitted before the practical observation can take place.
Okay, the practical observation, the timings: 2 hours for team member, 4 hours for hospitality supervisor. The sessions can be split, but must occur within the day and timings. Will need to be agreed at the initial meeting, and there is a requirement for team member to meet 1 hour prep and 1 hour service, and for supervisor 2 hours prep and 2 hours of service. So what is required for a successful observation? It needs to be a normal work environment and conditions. The IEPA will check ID before the observation commences. The ability to communicate with customers must be evident. They must be working independently for team members and with supervision for the hospitality supervisor, and working independently whilst supervising the team. Must have the ability to move from one area to another to show their knowledge and skills. And it's scheduled at a time when the business operation allows for the apprentice to show their skills, including preparation and service. But more importantly, it's really giving the apprentice the opportunity and the time to shine in their particular job role.
So moving on to the professional discussion. So the apprentice will have time to prepare for the professional discussion, because the endpoint assessor will send out the areas at least 5 days in advance of the discussion taking place. A provisional date is agreed at the initial meeting, which will be confirmed once the business project, practical observation and the test have been successfully completed, because the professional discussion must come last. So all the other component parts will need to have been achieved prior to the professional discussion taking place. It's not generally a face-to-face meeting, and it will be a videoed webinar. There is the facility as part of this for apprentices to be able to upload any presentation materials which may well be used by the hospitality supervisors. And the endpoint assessor will need to see identification before the professional discussion commences. It will focus on the core areas plus any specialist function that hasn't previously been observed by the endpoint assessor in the practical observation. The employer can be present, but not you as the provider. And it therefore, because of the requirement to actually receive the professional discussion 5 days before it occurs, it cannot take place on the same day as the observation. So for team member, it's a 40-minute professional discussion, and the first 10 minutes will be on the business project, and then the rest of the professional discussion will take place. We're advising, though, that the employer and apprentice set aside at least 50 minutes because there will be initially introductions, small talks and getting comfortable, etc. So just to allow that extra time. For hospitality supervisor, the actual professional discussion is 90 minutes. However, additional to that is 30 minutes. So the first 30 minutes will be the business project presentation. So that will take place first, and then the professional discussion will follow on afterwards. This is quite a length of time, so it is important that the apprentice is prepared in a comfortable environment with some water, but definitely in a suitable environment. We have had some instances where professional discussions have been taking place in the middle of pubs with apprentices with just a headset on, and it's been quite difficult for A, the apprentice to actually concentrate, and B, for it to be heard. So it does need to be in a suitable, quiet room. So in terms of the apprentice, then again, it's important that they have the pass and distinction criteria, so they know what they are being assessed on. It also helps if they've practiced the skill of having a professional discussion. So our endpoint assessment preparation tool can help with this, as well as if you're supporting them with undertaking some mock professional discussions. The apprentice can make notes and take those in with them and have them handy whilst they're undertaking the professional discussion. They will have the topic areas 5 days, so they'll have plenty of time to prepare and to discuss with their employer and you, the training provider, for them to sort of make some notes. So they need to ensure that they familiarise themselves with any previous information that they might have recorded in their training manuals or that you've supported them with. and that they've read through the actual endpoint assessment task instructions that are found in the endpoint assessment pack. They need to think of examples from their role to show how they demonstrate meeting the pass and distinction criteria, and you can clearly support them with that prior to the actual professional discussion taking place. And they really do need to practice that professional discussion, both with yourselves and perhaps the employer. Making notes, as I've said before, and take those in with them. And the other thing, because obviously for hospitality supervisor, there is a presentation part, it would be really helpful if they've practiced presentation skills with yourselves. Again, the endpoint assessment preparation tool can support with that. But if they've practiced any mock presentations with yourself so that they're comfortable with actually giving a presentation, that would be absolutely ideal. So feedback. Each part of endpoint assessment, except the online exam, essentially won't have any feedback given by the endpoint assessor on the day. And feedback will only occur basically if a fail. So you'll be then given the criteria which hasn't been met. You won't be told how to pass, you'll be given the criteria that the apprentice has failed, and obviously then you can support them with developing skills to enable them to pass at the next submission. So some general points to consider about endpoint assessment. So throughout all of the apprenticeship standards, resits cannot take place to gain a better grade. And all of the resits are essentially capped at a pass. So at any point should an apprentice retake, so for example if they had to retake the practical observation, even if they then meet the distinction criteria, unfortunately because it's a resit, they will then only be graded at a pass. The business project can be resubmitted once. Otherwise, if further resubmissions need to occur, then the apprentice would need to go back into a period of training, and then a new business project would need to be submitted. So all of the assessments must occur within a 2-month period. That's something that's laid out within the People First assessment plan. Although clearly if there are mitigating circumstances, then we can work around those things, but you would need to speak to the endpoint assessment team about that. Once all of the endpoint assessment has been completed, then final grades could take up to 20 days to actually come out. So these are the certificates that I talked about at the start of the presentation. The one there on the left is the one from the Institute for Apprentices that the ESFA are responsible for sending out on behalf of the Institute for Apprentices. And this will go directly to the employer. And then the one on the right is our statement of achievement. And this will be sent directly to the provider, so you will be able to present your apprentice with this. Okay, so we've come to the end of the presentation. So we're now just going to pull up to see if there's been any questions asked. Sorry, sorry to the person, I won't say your name, but not everybody needs me to share that, but sorry that you sort of disappeared in and out. You will receive the recording, so once we finish the recording, then we basically close this down. It then gets sort of saved, so within a week you'll have the recording. And I'll also send out the slides sort of independently as well as the recording. So if you need to use the slides to share with colleagues, then indeed you can do that as well. So we'll make sure that we do that for you. We haven't got any other questions. I'm not sure whether that's a good or a bad thing. We've either baffled you completely or we covered all the bits that we were supposed to be doing.
We'll just give a couple more minutes to see if there's any questions come in.
No, it doesn't look like anything else is coming in. Okay. Doesn't look like we've got any questions coming in at all. So that's excellent. So as I said, these should come out to
Well,
no, we have.
Some. We apologise. We've now found some. Let's just see if we can.
Jason's now struggling to open them up. So
no, it was just a thank you.
Oh no, we've got one at the bottom. So we start the projects at EPA. Absolutely. Yes. The projects are part of the endpoint assessment process. So whilst you can clearly carry out mocks, etc. with them, you shouldn't be starting the actual endpoint assessment project until after the initial, well, the apprentice shouldn't, until after the initial meeting, because it's at that point that the endpoint assessor will confirm that they agree the business project proposal. It clearly, you know, for hospitality supervisor, it's then quite an ask. There's a lot of work then for the apprentice to be undertaking. But so long as you're meeting those requirements back in the slides, that essentially it's about that it's relevant to the employer and that it's something that will improve something for them, then there shouldn't be any issue really with it being accepted. But we wouldn't expect that to have taken place. If it has taken place, then as I said, you know, you could be in a position that the apprentice will have to redo the project as part of endpoint assessment. And thank you for the people that have said thank you and that it was helpful. That's really good. So practice questions for team member. We've got some questions coming through now. So they are available in the endpoint assessment packs. We are sort of going to be removing them and probably adding them onto our EPA preparation tool. Some of them are also sort of being rewritten at the moment. And in time, we found out today that we are hopeful that we might have a system which sort of mirrors the Evolve system, so that your apprentices will be able to actually sort of practice online, as it were, or at least an offline version of the online Evolve version. So we are hopeful that there will be the opportunity to sort of sit them as if you are sitting them at them online in the future. But you know, I mean, by the future we might be talking sort of 6 months, but we're hopeful that that will be. It's something that's being piloted currently in functional skills. So we were discussing that today. Excellent.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's all the questions.
Thank you very much to all of you for listening in and for your questions. And I'm sure, you know, we're trying to get the information out to you as much as possible. If there's any amendments, then obviously that'll all be in our bi-monthly updates now, in our newsletters. So there will be one coming out, which I'll sort of ping out to everybody as well, so that you're aware it's available. And if anything changes, then we'll be sort of doing some, you know, further sessions like this. The intention as well is to do some sort of snippet voiced over presentations for some of the other standards. So I'm just about to do one specific to recipe logs. We may well do something specific just to business projects, just something bite-sized that you can sort of pick up and have a look at. We do appreciate that the endpoint assessment packs are exceptionally meaty. There's a lot to go through. And just for your information, we are in the process of sort of looking at how we can make those a little bit more user-friendly for you as well. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.
Have a lovely evening.